philosophy, and maybe we're getting somewhere, maybe we're starting to open up the God question for them. And then they'll say, oh, but I can't believe in a God who does what the God of the Old Testament did. And I think we've seen this time and time again, that this is the go-to objection for so many people. How can you worship a God who sanctioned what happened to the Canaanites or the Amalekites or whatever? And I think this is a really hard question, actually, for many Christians to answer. I'm not sure I've got the best answer to it myself, in all honesty. It's something that I'm still dealing with, and kind of, there are different ways in which I've heard it answered, and I'm not exactly sure where I even fall on this one. But I'd just be interested to hear what different perspectives you guys have to this very tough question. What do you do with some of those difficult passages in the Old Testament? Have we got a volunteer who wants to start off on this one? Brian, you look like you're ready to go.
I will start, yeah. I mean, in some senses, it goes back to your concept of God. And if your idea of God is just love, period, and there's no dimension to his nature, then of course it's really hard to understand any of this type of stuff. And but yet, if you recognize that God is, yes, God is love, God is righteous, he's holy, he's just, he is a judge as well. And I like to kind of just think about in terms of, I believe that God judged the world thoroughly with a flood at a certain point in history. And then he allowed humanity to grow and expand again. But then through continued rebellion, he brought other judgments at times. And so I think, I look at Joshua. Joshua, it was to the Canaanites what the flood was to the antediluvian world. He was God's judgment. So it wasn't, genocide would be if Joshua was driven and motivated by his own ambitions, and we want this land, let's get these people out, let's destroy them. That's not the biblical account. Joshua was led by God as God's instrument to judge. Now, for some people, that's not going to help at all. That's going to make it even worse, because you're saying God is a judge. Well, yes, God is a judge. That is clearly the nature of God. So that's one of the ways that I approach it.
And for you, it's just about facing that, and that we've got a God of both justice and love, and that took a particular form at a certain point in Jewish history. John, you look like you want to contribute on this one.
Oh, well, yes, I think it's one of those objections that's got many dimensions. And what you said, Brian, is absolutely right. You've got to bring into the picture the concept of judgment. What we find difficult is the fact that humans were allowed to do it. That's one of the additional difficulties. But let's stand back from it. Why do people say it's wrong? They judge it on the basis of a moral code. Where do they get that from? Now, here's one of the most interesting things about this question. Because those accounts that are regarded by many people as genocidal appear in Deuteronomy, where the code exists that people use to judge them. And that has been a thing that has wormed its way into my mind over a number of years and begun to suggest to me that all is not as it seems. Because Deuteronomy appears to be happy with what happened. Because there's the moral code, it's not in some other book. These events are not described in some obscure, different book of Scripture. It's one of the most moral books in the Old Testament. So now we've got the two things together in the same book. The next step I take is to say, do we understand it correctly? For example, it sounds like wipe everybody out. Did that happen? No, because the cities all reappear in the text of Scripture. So they weren't all wiped out. And it's very interesting that as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs in Britain points out that the first humanitarian rules of war appear in the same book as these events. So now we're making it more difficult because we've got to have all these things together. And one of the ways of looking at it that I find interesting is to think of how those could be reasonably reconciled.